Hello, and welcome to the July 7th, 2020 World News program hosted by me, Touring News. Today we'll be going over domestic and international news as well as current affairs. The Dakota Access Pipeline to shut down pending review, the federal judge rules. The ruling, a victory for the Native American and environmentalist groups who oppose the pipeline, said it must be emptied of oil by August 5th. The Dakota Access Pipeline, an oil route from North Dakota to Illinois that has inspired intense protests and legal battles, must be shut down pending an environmental review and be emptied of oil by the 5th of August, a district court ruled on Monday. The decision, which could be subject to appeal, is a victory for the Standing Rock Sioux tribe and other Native American and environmental groups who have fought the project for years, and a significant defeat for President Donald Trump, who has sought to keep the Dakota Access Pipeline alive. Today is a historic day for the Standing Rock Sioux tribe and the many people who have supported us in the fight against the pipeline. Mike Faith, chairman of the Standing Rock Sioux tribe, said in a statement, "The pipeline should never have been built here. We told them that from the beginning." The United States government food program falls short. The boxed food aid program falls short. The U.S. government delivered far less food aid than it pledged by the end of June, according to food bank managers and data from the Agricultural Department sent to Reuters. The Farmers to Families Food Box program, one of several new government efforts to relieve struggling Americans, aimed to take food from farmers typically produced for restaurants and deliver it to millions of people who lost their jobs or were otherwise hit by the coronavirus lockdown. However, the program drew criticism from food banks, analysts, and even some United States senators for awarding contracts to often inexperienced vendors who were unable to source the food and deliver it in a timely manner. The program was supposed to deliver $1.2 billion worth of food. However, it seems they only delivered $755.5 million, or 63% of the $1.2 billion pledged. Overburdened food banks across the country were optimistic that the program would bring ready-to-deliver food to families in need. The program, championed by the daughter of United States President Ivanka Trump, sought to build a bridge between people unable to buy enough food and farmers who were dumping milk, euthanizing hogs, and destroying lettuce fields as demand from shuttered restaurants fell off. Deliveries were slow to start and amounted to less than promised. Georgia governor declares a state of emergency and authorizes 1,000 National Guard troops to Atlanta. In a quote from Kemp, "Peaceful protests were hijacked by criminals with a dangerous, destructive agenda. Now innocent Georgians are being targeted, shot, and left for dead. This lawlessness must be stopped and order restored to our capital city. I've declared a state of emergency and called up the Georgia Guard because the safety of our citizens comes first. This measure will allow troops to protect state property and dispatch state law enforcement officers to patrol our streets. Enough with the tough talk. We must protect the lives and livelihoods of all Georgians." Coronavirus surges in parts of the United States, but some reopenings proceed. Florida attributes rising infections to spread among younger people, and New York eases restrictions. California and Florida accounted for nearly 45% of the more than 49,000 new cases reported on Sunday. In Florida, which on Sunday passed the 200,000 case mark, Governor Ron DeSantis attributed the rising number of infections to increased testing and to asymptomatic spread among younger people. He said the state would like to get the rate of positive tests, which climbed to about 15% in mid-June, back down to 3 to 4%. In some counties, such as Miami-Dade, the rate of positive tests was as high as 20%. Across the country, New York City entered Phase 3 of its reopening plan, allowing nail salons, spas, and massage therapists to resume operations and easing restrictions on park activities such as basketball, volleyball, and handball. Last week, the city said it wouldn't move forward with indoor dining, a critical part of Phase 3, citing rising infections in other parts of the country. While New York hasn't formally decided whether schools will reopen in the fall, the state has directed its 700 school districts to put together plans on what reopening would look like. "We want kids back in school for a number of reasons," Governor Andrew Cuomo said on Monday, "but we're not going to say children should go back to school until we know it's safe." 1 million jobs lost, a heart attack for the New York City economy. While the national jobless rate has rebounded slightly, as many states started to reopen, New Yorkers continue to lose jobs and seek benefits. New York City, hit hard by the coronavirus pandemic, is mired in the worst economic calamity since the financial crisis of the 1970s, when it nearly went bankrupt. The city is staggering toward reopening, with some workers back at their desks or behind cash registers. However, the unemployment rate is hovering near 20%, a figure not seen since the Great Depression. Entire industries, restaurants, hotels, theaters, museums, and galleries went from operating at full throttle to being practically shuttered. Economists said they feared that the fallout would soon spread to other sectors like education, healthcare, and professional services. Wall Street, a main driver of the city's economy, appears to be somewhat insulated for now because the markets have rebounded due to extreme financial aid from the Federal Reserve Bank and the United States Treasury. And several of the biggest banks have pledged not to lay off workers during the pandemic. Many businesses, including restaurants and hotels, however, are expected to close for good. The picture has grown even dimmer after officials delayed indefinitely reopening indoor dining. Fed Chair Bostic from Atlanta sees signs that economic activity is leveling off. Economic activity in parts of the United States is showing signs of leveling off amid a resurgence in coronavirus cases, according to Federal Reserve Bank of Atlanta President Raphael Bostic. There are a couple of things that we are seeing, and some of them are troubling and might suggest that the trajectory of this recovery is going to be a bit bumpier than it might be otherwise, Bostic said in an interview with the Financial Times published Tuesday. We're watching this very closely, trying to understand exactly what is happening. Bostic suggested that more economic support for small businesses may be needed, saying that the longer this goes without them getting relief, the more likely that they're not going to be able to survive, and so all the jobs associated with what will move from the temporary column into the permanent column will be extremely painful. In a highlight of U.S. virus bailouts, Trump ties, investors, and Chinese companies, this will be a brief coverage of some of the PPP loans that have given out. It is impossible to cover all of the PPP loans that were given out. Companies with ties to President Donald Trump surfaced in a list of virus relief recipients on Monday, as did more than 88,000 loans for religious organizations, a number of investment firms, and some U.S. units of Chinese companies. Advocates for the small business program said that a massive release of the data, the government's largest coronavirus relief operation with the PPP, the Paycheck Protection Program, contained too many gaps to evaluate for effectiveness. The data can be found below. The information on almost 4.9 million loans released Monday morning by the United States Small Business Administration website revealed that big-name law firms and cultural institutions, including Carnegie Hall and Ayn Rand University, were approved for the program. Several investment firms have questioned their inclusion in the data, saying they considered tapping so-called PPP loan programs but did not. A few of the highlights were Trump's Waikiki partner, the Kushner family. United States units of Chinese companies got American bailout funds. A firm linked to Pelosi's husband got a virus loan. Carnegie Hall, the Whitney Museum, SF Symphony. Venture firms say that they did not seek the bailouts, but they did, which we'll be covering over here. Kanye West sneaker brand received millions from a government loan. These disclosures came after members of Congress and others voiced concerns about the level of transparency surrounding the PPP. However, they do not provide full details for the loans. Names of companies that borrowed less than $150,000, a group that comprises the vast majority of the program's borrowers, were not made public, and borrowers' loans were discussed only in broad ranges of values, such as $5 million to $10 million. Private equity firms borrow from PPP, despite a later rule barring them. Investment firms received money from the Paycheck Protection Program intended to provide relief to small businesses affected by the pandemic. Hedge fund and private equity firms were among those that tapped the Payment Protection Program, created to help small businesses get through the coronavirus pandemic. 10 private investment firms accessed the program, securing loan amounts between $150,000 and $1 million, according to an analysis of the data released by the SBA on Monday that identifies recipients of loans exceeding $150,000. Investment banks also got aid, with tens of millions of dollars earmarked by the United States lawmakers to assist small businesses. Broadhaven Capital Partners, which according to its website had advised on more than $50 billion worth of deal in the past decade, and helped the sale of asset manager Legg Mason, applied for and was cleared for a PPP loan of between $350,000 and $1 million. Technology-focused investment bank Union Square Advisors LLC, consumer and healthcare-focused investment bank North Point Advisors, and consumer-focused investment bank Sawaya Partners were also approved of a loan between $350,000 and $1 million. Venture firms say they didn't seek the bailouts despite what the data shows. Representatives of several venture capital firms that were listed as small business bailout recipients in federal data say they didn't apply for the program or get any of the funding. In at least one case, Andreessen Horowitz's, the loan in question for between $350,000 to $1 million, went to a portfolio company for which Andreessen is the beneficial owner. The SBA, which administered the loan program with the Treasury Department, did not need to read that part. I apologize. Additionally, dozens of expensive private schools received millions in United States pandemic loans. At least 6 dozen expensive private schools, including one where former President Barack Obama's children studied, got between $42 million and $104.25 million in loans under the U.S. program. Among the schools, the biggest beneficiaries include the storied Washington-based Sidwell Friends School and the progressive St. Anne's School in Brooklyn, with both receiving between $5 to $10 million in forgivable loans. Other recipients include Miami Country Day School, which received up to $5 million, and the Aspen Country Day School, which received $650,000. Their tuition is in the range of, wait for it, $30,000 to $37,000 per year. And finally, thousands of United States farmers got $6.4 billion in U.S. small business loans. Over 100,000 entities, including soybean, corn farmers, beef and dairy operations, hunters and trappers, vineyards, and fruit and vegetable growers, received some of the $6.4 billion worth of aid. In world news about the economy, companies are seen slashing capex by 12% this year, deeper than 2009. Big and mid-cap firms globally are expected to slash capital expenditure spending by an average of 12% this year as they reel with the fallout. With some data from individual countries, it shows the United States are expected to slash capex by 22%, Russian firms by 19.2%, French firms by 13.4%. In Asia, South Korean companies led with an average capex drop of 16% predicted, followed by Japan with an 11% slide. In China, which has managed to bring the coronavirus outbreak under control, the expected decline is supposed to be much smaller at only 4.5%. The data also show that analysts expect companies to cut operating costs by 19% on average this year, which would also be the sharpest decline in 14 years, with revenue falling 5% as well. Gun violence marked 4th of July weekend in cities across the United States. Chicago, New York, and Atlanta saw a surge in shootings. Young children were among the fatalities. A spate of shootings in cities across the United States over the holiday weekend resulted in the deaths of a number of children and calls from officials to halt the violence. Police departments in cities including Chicago and New York reported a higher number of incidents and fatalities compared with the same period last year. Children were shot and killed in Atlanta, Chicago, and Philadelphia, and a young boy was killed after a shooter opened fire at an Alabama mall. Between Friday and Sunday in Atlanta, there were 11 different shootings and 31 victims, 5 of whom were killed, a spokesman for the Atlanta Police Department said, with more than 75 shootings have occurred in Atlanta over the last several weeks. Colleges plan to reopen campuses, but for just some students at a time. To provide some semblance of the campus experience during a pandemic, colleges say chunks of the student body will have to stay away and study remotely for all or part of the year. In order to achieve social distancing, many colleges are saying they will allow only 40 to 60% of their students to return to campus and live in the college residence halls at any one time, often divided by class year. At the same time, very few colleges are offering tuition discounts, even for those students who are being forced to take the classes from home. It will not be the same social life, not that students are upset that there might not be big parties, people are just looking forward to daily small interactions instead of having to stay in their dorms to do online education. Related to what's happening with colleges are bracing for a sharp drop in foreign students, especially from China. New guidance from ICE could prove a hurdle for students who say, if I can get a visa, I would go. New guidance issued Monday by Immigration and Customs Enforcement could hamstring students and prevent them from attending and keeping up with their courses. Under the guidance, if a school has a hybrid offering like Wisconsin's mix of online and in-person classes, foreign students won't be allowed to set up a schedule of just online courses, whether in the United States or from afar. If a school is teaching classes entirely online, students on visas in the United States will likely to have to leave the country or transfer to a school with in-person instruction. If they're overseas, they can maintain a full online course load at such schools. At some United States universities, international students account for upward of 15% of enrollment and an even higher share of tuition revenue. There were nearly 370,000 Chinese nationals, or 34% of all foreign students, enrolled in United States higher education institutions during the 2018-2019 economic year, according to the Institute of International Education. These students account for nearly one-third, or $15 billion, of the $44.7 billion of revenue that foreign students spent on tuition in the United States and other costs, including living expenses and books, in 2018. It's pretty impactful that the volume of students to not be able to participate as part of the United States academic program. A survey of nearly 600 United States colleges and universities released by the IIE in May found that 88% of international student enrollment to decline this year, with 30% forecasting a substantial decrease. In short news, the Supreme Court expands a robocall ban as the court strikes down an exception for government debt collectors. The Supreme Court on Monday blocked the use of robocalls to collect government-backed debt, closing an exception Congress enacted in 2015 to a decades-old ban on unwanted and intrusive automated cell phone dialing campaigns. In a quote from Justice Brett Kavanaugh, writing for the court's plurality, Americans passionately disagree about many things, but they are largely united in their disdain for robocalls. That unity didn't extend, however, to the justices themselves in the rationale for invalidating the debt-collecting exception. While 7 justices ultimately agreed to strike it down, they divided over the best way to resolve a constitutional challenge to the robocall law. TikTok is pulling out of Hong Kong after a Chinese law controversy. ByteDance's TikTok will pull the viral video app from Hong Kong's mobile stores in the coming days, becoming the first internet service to withdraw after Beijing enacted sweeping powers to crack down on national security threats. The announcement came after internet giants Facebook, Google, and Twitter voiced opposition to national security legislation that grants the Hong Kong government sweeping powers to police the online and public spheres. TikTok, which has insisted it operates independently of Beijing, despite its Chinese ownership, may be able to argue that the withdrawal is a move to escape requests to censor content and share user data. Mike Pompeo, United States Secretary of State, says the United States is looking to ban Chinese social media apps, including TikTok. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo said on Monday that the United States is certainly looking at banning Chinese social media apps, including TikTok, suggesting it shared information with the Chinese government, a charge it denied. He said, "I do not want to get out in front of President Donald Trump, but it's something that we're looking at," Pompeo said in an interview with Fox News. Amazon, Facebook, Apple, and Google CEOs to testify to the House on July 27th. The chief executive officers of Amazon, Facebook, Apple, and Alphabet will testify on the 27th of July before a congressional panel investigating competition in the technology industry, according to an announcement from the House Judiciary Committee. Jeff Bezos, Mark Zuckerberg, Sundar Pichai, and Tim Cook are likely to face a torrent of critical questions from lawmakers on the panel's antitrust subcommittee as the investigation builds a case for revamping antitrust enforcement. If you'd like to watch this live with myself and the rest of my community, we currently have 39 people viewing the recording of this right now. You can come watch it at twitch.tv/Touring News on the 27th of July. This was also a way to quickly promote our live streaming channel, of which we're recording this on. United States firms in India are not ready to pay the digital tax, a lobbying group says. A lobbying group representing the United States technology giants has said its members are not yet ready to make the first payment of the country's digital tax due this week, urging New Delhi to defer the move. India, in March, said all foreign billings for digital services provided in the country would be taxed at 2% from the 1st of April, a move that caught United States technology firms off guard as they're battling the coronavirus pandemic. The tax applies on e-commerce transactions on websites such as Amazon. Google, in particular, has been worried as the tax applies on advertising revenue earned overseas that those ads target customers in India. The United States government awards Novavax $1.6 billion for a coronavirus vaccine, and Regeneron signs a $450 million contract with the United States government for COVID-19 therapy, and more doling out of money through the Operation Warp Speed program. This is intended to cover commercialization, testing, manufacturing, and potential coronavirus vaccine in the United States with the aim of delivering 100 million doses by July 2021. Regeneron is supposed to supply a potential double antibody cocktail for COVID-19. The cocktail, RegenCov-2, is in separate clinical trials assessing its effectiveness in preventing and treating COVID-19. Bayer's Roundup cancer settlement hits a snag. Bayer AG's plan for moving on from its Roundup legal woes hits a snag barely 2 weeks after it announced a settlement of claims against the weed killer when a judge expressed skepticism over part of the proposal. United States District Judge Vince Chabria wrote in a court filing Monday that a proposed system for dealing with future lawsuits over the herbicide is problematic. Shares of Bayer, which inherited the weed killer through the purchase of Monsanto, fell 6.9% in Frankfurt. The judge's misgivings center on a plan to create a class of future claims as part of the nearly $11 billion settlement. Any change to that portion of the proposal wouldn't necessarily affect the rest of the deal, in which the company agreed to resolve about 125,000 existing lawsuits. About 30,000 claims contending that Roundup caused non-Hodgkin's lymphoma are not yet subject to deals between plaintiffs and Bayer. Some United States plaintiffs' lawyers are vowing to file another wave of new suits that could add tens of thousands to that total. Aircraft lessor Avalon cancels 27 Boeing 737 MAX jets in more problems for the beleaguered company. Due to the two plane crashes, one, I apologize that I can't remember them off the top of my head. I know that it was to do with the Air Max software program, MCAS. It also canceled one Airbus A330neo widebody jet. Sorry that I don't have those crashes off the top of my mind. Perhaps somebody from my channel could tell me where they were. Europe sees a deeper slump and a new warning on the uneven virus hit. The European Union is forecasting an 8.7% euro slump in 2020, with 6.1% growth in 2021. One of the Boeing crashes was in Ethiopia, a source of me is telling. Europe's economy was suffering more than previously estimated this year and take longer to recover because of a slow on the easing of coronavirus restrictions. It now forecasts a contraction of 8.7%, a full percentage point higher and deeper than previously predicted. Risks remain exceptionally high and mainly to the downside, the European Commission said. The European Central Bank may ask banks to withhold dividends for longer. The European Central Bank is considering an extension to a recommendation that banks suspend dividends and share buybacks and will soon provide an update, the ECB supervisor Kerstin Af-Jochnick said on Tuesday. We've now moved into the international news segment of the program. Brazilian President Jair Bolsonaro tests positive for COVID-19. After months of denying the seriousness of the pandemic and brushing aside protective measures, Mr. Bolsonaro felt symptoms of COVID-19. More than 65,000 Brazilians have died of the coronavirus. Singapore's fake news law trips up opposition as election looms. Enforcing a fake news law in the run-up to a national election, authorities in Singapore have ordered that online references to some comments made by opposition figures on key issues must carry a warning that the content contains false information. Rights groups have long warned that the law, which came into effect last year, has been repeatedly directed at opposition figures, may be used to silence criticism of the government ahead of the 10th of July. Since the campaign began on the 1st of July, opposition candidates have taken to task under the law over comments made on three issues: government spending for foreign students, plans to grow the city-state's 5.7 million population to 10 million, and government advisories that discourage COVID-19 testing for foreign workers. Voting amid coronavirus concerns, Singaporeans question the need for foreigners. For many Singaporeans voting on Friday under the cloud of the coronavirus pandemic, a big election issue is job prospects and whether their rich little island needs so many foreigners taking better paid roles. Opposition gripes about foreigners holding top-tier professional roles has resonated with voters, analysts say, and a spate of reports about foreigners breaking lockdown rules and having their work passes revoked have fueled this resentment. The COVID-19 outbreak has brought out the issue of foreigners even more starkly, as the issue becomes very divisive in the small Southeast Asian nation. In other news about foreign migrant workers, looming expat law may force some 800,000 Indians to leave Kuwait. A bill which aims to reduce the Kuwait's expat community by 40% may come into effect later this year. A new Kuwaiti bill, waiting to be enacted into law, aims to reduce the country's sizable expat community by 40% within months, according to reports, a move that may affect some 800,000 Indians. While India is the largest expat community, there are about 3.4 million foreigners in Kuwait. With Kuwait's overall population standing at 8.4 million, Kuwaiti nationals constitute only 30% of the population. The move coincided with Kuwaiti Prime Minister Sheikh Sabah al-Khalid al-Sabah's comments last week, in which he said the country should reduce the expat population to 30% of the current estimated 70%. According to the bill, Indians should not exceed 15% of the population. Kuwait is going to disperse $780 million to 70,000 citizens working in the private sector. Only around 70,000 Kuwaiti citizens work in the private sector, where most employees are foreigners. As companies have laid off large numbers of foreign workers, the government has sought to retain Kuwaitis. Many of them work in the state sector, which has not experienced mass layoffs during the coronavirus crisis. Kuwait, like other oil-dependent Gulf monarchies, has long tried to encourage more of its citizens to accept private sector jobs and give such workers extra government benefits. Despite its vast wealth, the country could see its deficit widen to more than 11% of GDP this year from a 4.8% surplus last year, the IMF is estimating. The United Kingdom is pledging to spend $3 billion on green projects in an economy plan, with British Foreign Finance Minister Rishi Sunak earmarking this money to improve the energy efficiency of homes and public buildings as part of a broader plan to kickstart the economy and save jobs. £2 billion of these grants, worth up to £5,000 each, will cover 2/3 of the cost of insulation and double glazing of windows. The poorest families will receive up to £10,000 without having to pay anything. The remaining £1 billion will be spent on reducing greenhouse gas emissions from public sector buildings. Moving to Hungary, the Hungarian president calls on Ukraine and Romania to stop polluting rivers, with an image shown here. Hungary's president called on Ukraine and Romania on Tuesday to stop polluting two major rivers that flow across Hungary after floods in the past 2 weeks brought in dirty carpets of plastic bottles from the neighbors. In letters to Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky and Romanian President Klaus Iohannis, published on President János Ader's official website, Ader said Hungarian authorities could not clean up all the waste. It is disappointing that pollution of the Tisza River with waste has not been reduced and poses a lasting threat to the fragile ecosystem of the river. Our machines are no longer able to handle the piles of garbage that come in unstoppable quantities. Japan's household spending slumps by a record as curbs hit travel and dining out. Household spending fell at the fastest pace on record in May as consumers heeded authorities' calls to stay home to contain the coronavirus pandemic, pushing the world's third largest economy into a deeper decline. Household spending slumped 16.2% in May from a year earlier. The drop was larger than a median market forecast for a 12.2% fall, and extended an 11.1% decline in April. Separate data on Tuesday showed May inflation-adjusted real wages dropped at the fastest pace since June 2015, adding to signs of stress in the labor market. The pace of recovering is worrying, said Atsushi Takeda, chief economist at the Itochu Economic Research Institute. Irish house building to fall by 1/3 due to the COVID-19 pandemic, says their central bank. It's likely to fall by 1/3 over 3 years to COVID-19 disruptions and could fall in half in the event of a second wave of infections, a senior central bank official said on Tuesday. A scarcity of supply has led to rapid rises in rents and levels of homelessness in recent years in Ireland, whose economy was booming until the coronavirus crisis shut it down at the end of March. In other very worrying news about housing crises across the world, almost 40% of borrowers in Italy have problems with home loans, says the Bank of Italy. 40% of Italian borrowers are struggling to pay home loans because of the impact of the coronavirus crisis, and almost half of those surveyed expect their incomes to fall over the next 12 months, according to the Bank of Italy's study published on Tuesday. In the past 2 months, which correspond to the strictest phase of the measures to contain the epidemic, more than half of individuals surveyed declared they had seen a reduction in their family incomes. Spain extends coronavirus aid for tenants and homeowners. Spain's cabinet will on Tuesday approve the extension of measures aimed at easing the financial burden on rental tenants and homeowners hit by the coronavirus, government sources told Reuters. With the new measures, tenants will be able to renew their existing contracts for 6 months under the same conditions, while a ban on utility companies cutting gas, electricity, and water supplies will remain in place until the 30th of September. For qualifying homeowners, the deadline to apply for a holiday on mortgage payments will be pushed back until the end of September from the 20th of July. Spain's economic output is likely to have shrunk by 20% in the second quarter, according to their central bank. In March, the government approved the $700 million Euro aid package to help vulnerable households and later introduced a minimum income program to reach around 2.3 million people. The Israeli Public Health Director quits and wraps the swift opening of the economy. Israel's public health director quit on Tuesday amid a spike in new coronavirus cases, saying it had reopened the economy too rapidly and lost its way in dealing with the pandemic. Sagal Sadetsky, an epidemiologist, announced her resignation a day after Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's cabinet reimposed a series of restrictions, including the closure of bars, gyms, and event halls. After a national lockdown in April, Israel flattened the coronavirus infection curve in May to about 20 new cases per day. However, since the reopening of schools and many businesses 2 months ago, the number of coronavirus cases has surged, reaching more than 1,000 a day last week. They now expect the number of patients of ventilators, 32, to reach 2,000. with the second coronavirus wave slamming Israel. Egypt, France, Germany, and Jordan warn Israel on their annexation of the West Bank, saying that doing so could have consequences for bilateral relations, with a statement being distributed by the German Foreign Ministry. The countries, which include two of Israel's leading partners in the Middle East, said their foreign ministers had discussed how to restart talks between Israel and the Palestinian Authority. The Palestinian Authority, which wants the West Bank for a future Palestinian state, opposes the move. Quote, "We concur that any annexation of Palestinian territories occupied in 1967 would be a violation of international law and imperil the foundations of the peace process. We would not recognize any changes to the 1967 borders that are not agreed on by both parties in the conflict, and it could also have consequences for the relations with Israel." Kenyan police fired tear gas and arrest marchers protesting at brutality. Kenyan police on Tuesday fired tear gas and arrested activists gathering for a march against perceived government injustice that has been given extra impetus this year by allegations by rights groups of police brutality during the COVID-19 lockdown. Activists said protesters from several areas had planned to march from their homes to the center of the capital, Nairobi, but many were dispersed or arrested before reaching there. Samuel Kiriro said 6 of his colleagues from rights groups, the Ghetto Foundation in the Mathare slum, had been arrested. Activists rally each year on July 7th, marking the date in 1990 when opponents of late President Daniel Arap Moi launched a bid to open up multi-party politics. The protest is called Sabah Sabah 77 in Swahili because of the date. This year, protesters have been galvanized by mounting accusations of police brutality during the coronavirus lockdown. "The police have been killing a lot of people. During this pandemic, it has gotten worse," said Michael Njau, an activist at the Kiamaiko Justice Center. Indonesia imposed a 10% VAT on Amazon, Google, Netflix, and Spotify to reduce the deficits that they're going to be running in response to the COVID-19 pandemic. Spending patterns have shifted with increased remote working as a result of the coronavirus crisis, which hit state finances. Indonesia, the world's 4th most populous country with a population of 270 million, is experiencing a boom in digital economy, which is expected to reach 130 billion by 2025. A study by Google, Temasek Holdings, and Bain & Company predicts. It expects a 13% yearly drop in state revenue this year as the pandemic hits business activity, which combined with nearly 50 billion for the fight against the coronavirus pandemic is forecast to more than triple the 2020 state budget. I think I really messed that part up and made it difficult to understand. I apologize. Just reread the video, the words if you needed to. In order to balance their budget, Indonesia is unveiling a $40 billion bond scheme to fund recovery from the pandemic. Indonesia unveiled this financing scheme for its fiscal deficit on Monday, and the central bank set to buy some $28 billion directly without receiving any interest to help the economic recovery. The bond buying program will help finance the 2020 fiscal deficit, which is forecast to reach 6.34% of GDP this year, as the government steps up spending to fight the virus outbreak while revenue drops. Bank of Indonesia would also be a standby buyer to help pay some interest rate expenses for the 177 trillion rupiah worth of bonds that the government will sell in auctions to fund recovery schemes for some businesses. Vietnam jails Facebook user for 8 years over anti-state posts. A court in Vietnam on Tuesday sentenced the man to 8 years in prison after finding him guilty of uploading anti-state posts on his Facebook account, the security minister said. Despite sweeping economic reform and increasing openness to social chains, Vietnam's ruling Communist Party retains tight media censorship and tolerates little criticism. Nguyen Quoc Duc Vuong, 29, was charged with making, storing, spreading information and materials, items for the purpose of opposing the state, at a one-day trial in the Central Highlands province of Lam Dong. Vuong was accused of live-streaming 110 hours of videos and writing 366 posts on his Facebook account to smear the image of Ho Chi Minh, Vietnam's founding leader, and spread anti-state propaganda. Russia detains an ex-journalist, accusing him of passing secrets to the West, accusing him of treason, saying he passed military secrets to an unnamed NATO power. Footage released by the FSB security service showed Ivan Safronov being detained outside his Moscow flat by armed plainclothes agents who searched him before putting him into a van. Safronov, who has covered military affairs for 2 national newspapers, faces up to 2 decades in jail if found guilty. His trial is expected to be held behind closed doors because of the sensitive nature. Syrian-Russian airstrikes in Idlib amount to war crimes, as do the jihadist attacks, according to the United Nations. Syrian and Russian planes have carried out deadly airstrikes amounting to war crimes on schools, hospitals, and markets in the Idlib province, the United Nations investigators said on Tuesday, in a report that also condemned attacks by jihadist fighters. They found that indiscriminate bombardment by pro-government forces ahead of a March ceasefire brokered with Turkey claimed hundreds of lives and forced nearly 1 million civilians to flee, which may amount to a crime against humanity. The United Nations Commission of Inquiry on Syria also accused Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, otherwise known as HTS, a jihadist group that controls part of northwest Syria, of firing artillery into civilian areas with no apparent legitimate military objective. Fighters from the HTS, a group formerly known as the Nusra Front, have tortured and executed detainees, it added. What is clear from the military campaign is that pro-government forces and United Nations designated terrorists flagrantly violated the laws of war and the rights of civilians in Syria, Paulo Pinheiro, chairman of the United Nations panel, said in a statement. In other humanitarian abuses, representatives of the Chinese Uyghurs file evidence to the International Criminal Court. The move is an effort to spark an investigation of China for alleged human rights violations. Overseas representatives of the China's ethnic Uyghur group on Monday said they filed evidence to the International Criminal Court, the ICC, in a novel effort to spark a formal investigation of China and its top leaders for alleged human rights violations. Uyghurs, who are mostly Muslim, claim a long history of mistreatment in the Xinjiang province in far western China. The hundreds of pages of filings in the International Court include claims that the Chinese-run political re-education camps used torture and other methods to strip Uyghurs of their religion and culture. Allegations have largely been confirmed by international media and widely condemned by Western governments. China's government regularly denies allegations by Uyghurs or any of the country's minorities are being treated badly and says their affairs are a domestic matter. Beijing says authorities have applied an iron hand to root out alleged terrorists within the Uyghur community, blaming some individuals for bombing and stabbings. In other news from China, they raised the emergency level as heavy rains triggered the floods, with some incredible numbers of downfall of rain. China raised its national emergency response on Tuesday as days of torrential rain triggered flood warnings across the country, killing more than 100 people. Guizhou, Anhui, Hunan, and Hubei provinces were expected to record 10 to 11 inches, 250 to 280 millimeters for the rest of the world, of rain on Tuesday, according to the China Meteorological Administration. In the central city of Wuhan, where the coronavirus epidemic first erupted in December, a record-breaking 426 millimeters, 16.8 inches, of rain fell on Sunday, the China Daily Official reported. There does not appear to be any let-up in the rains. Australia's second-largest city heads back into coronavirus lockdown, with lockdown measures being reimposed, confining Melbourne residents to their homes unless undertaking essential business travel or essential business for 6 weeks, as scrambles official to contain the outbreak. I believe they have also shut the border with New South Wales and Victoria. Hundreds of police officers and army troops are being deployed to enforce the closure of Victoria's border with New South Wales from midnight on Tuesday. Iraq partially reopens the Iran trade crossing, border officials say. After more than 3 months of closure to combat the spread of new coronavirus, the crossing was being opened only for trade of foodstuffs, allowing in some 500 trucks from Iran per week, and would open every Wednesday and Sunday from now on. Iraq closed its international borders and provincial boundaries in March, except for the delivery of essential goods such as food, as it sought to curb the spread of the coronavirus. Iran has recorded their highest daily death toll from COVID-19, with 163 deaths on Sunday. Oh, I apologize. The 200 deaths reported on Tuesday exceed the previous record from Sunday, when the ministry reported 163 deaths in a day. They've recorded a total of 11,931 deaths, with 245,688 infections. In a currency crisis embroiling Iran, it strains their economic defenses. Desperate to afford her daughter's overseas university fees, a 58-year-old retired Iranian teacher, Mariam Hosseini, withdrew all her savings from the bank to buy United States dollars. What is causing this crisis to happen? The cause of the misery was a sharp drop in the Iranian rial to its weakest against the United States dollar. The currency's fall has not only made life more expensive, it may also test Iran's ability to prop up an economy battered by crippling United States sanctions and the new coronavirus. The dollar was being offered for 215,000 rials on Monday, according to the website Bombast, against an official rate of 42,000. The currency plunge in recent weeks had forced the central bank to act, pumping hundreds of millions of dollars into the market to stabilize the rial. Central Bank Governor Abdel Nasser Hamati described the interventions as wise and targeted. The bank had ample foreign reserves, he said, without disclosing their amount. They have limited foreign exchange reserves to inject in the market and will not be able to contain further depreciation in the presence of U.S. sanctions and isolation from the international community. The rial has lost about 70% of its value following the United States' withdrawal from Iran's 2015 nuclear pact with 6 powers in 2018. In the final 2 stories for the day, Turkey says it detained 276 migrants in a smuggling operation. Turkish police detained the 276 migrants on a cargo ship docked on the Aegean coast on Tuesday and also captured 8 people trying to smuggle them out of the country. The Turkish-flagged ship's activities had been monitored for a long time, and migrants were seen boarding the vessel in western Turkey's Izmir province on Monday evening. It said an operation including Coast Guard vessels and police teams was launched. The migrants were from countries including Syria, Iran, Afghanistan, Bangladesh, and Somalia. More than 1 million people reached Greece from Turkey in 2015-16, with the 2016 agreement between the European Union and Turkey for Ankara to take the migrants back in return for funds to a sharp fall in numbers. And finally, a Turkish floating power plant firm aims to end the blackouts in West Libya. A company running a fleet of floating power generators is sending a technical team to Libya to make a proposal to supply electricity to the west of the North African nation. The west is where the Turkish are backing the GNA, which is the United Nations recognized government. The LNA, or the Khalifa Haftar military, controls the eastern part of Libya. The split between the east and the west, maybe if I just read the article, by a conflict that erupted when Muammar Gaddafi was overthrown in 2011, residents of the oil and gas producing nation face hours of power cuts each day. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in to the news program today. That was a brief overview of world affairs, current events, and international news to the best of my ability and what could be provided in one broadcast. I'm your host, Brad Weider, or Touring News. If you like any of this content, you can find us live at the channel twitch.tv/Touring News, on YouTube at Touring News 1, or here on the YouTube channel. Please like, comment, and subscribe down below. Whether or not it's a good comment or a bad comment, I would like to read it. And if you're a streamer yourself, go ahead and watch this on your channel to react to it. Thank you very much and have a wonderful day.